We're live now.
Okay, great. This is Senate Gov Ops. We're back on the 15th of February. We're continuing our discussion of S39, and we have several current and former members of the Vermont House here to talk to us about their experiences and their work on maybe sister legislation. So we're gonna get started with Representative Troy Hedrick. Come on up, and we'll introduce ourselves to the room and just do it once, so we don't have to repeat it a million times. So, good afternoon. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy.
Olivia Parker, Committee Assistant. Senator Tanya Liborski. Rebecca White, Windsor County District.
Bob Norris, Franklin County.
Ann Watson, Washington District.
And this is Senator Allison Clarkson from Windsor, who will join us in a minute. So if you want to introduce yourself and where you're from for the record, and then just tell us what you want us to know about S39 or related topics.
Sure. My name is Troy Hedrick, representative from Burlington. And so I'm surprised to be here both now in the room and surprised a little bit still to be here in the State House in this role. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how I arrived here and why I think the ease by which I arrived here is a problem, and some of the hurdles I think that are in place for people who would like to be here but can't be, right? So I'm going to frame this from the perspective of the concept of privilege and how easy it is for me to have arrived here, and how I think that those privileges should exist for more people. I think it's always difficult when we're talking about concepts of legislative pay, right? So legislation that may potentially benefit those of us who are making the decisions, right? That's always difficult. And I've been talking about this from the start. Okay, let me back way up. I have never aspired to do this job. I've always been very fascinated by politics. I've always had most certainly opinions about politics, complaints about politics, but I never thought I would run. And when I come from a district where I've always been really, really pleased, and I've never had to worry about who's representing me. Our values have always seemed to align. There have been some very strong legislators I've been in my district, and I'm grateful for that. So when one of them approached me and said, "Hey, I'm not running again. Would you consider running?" I said, "Absolutely not. That's not going to happen." So this person is very skilled at keeping me on the phone, and here I am. And one of the reasons it was so easy is because I ran unopposed, and I think I ran unopposed, and I think a lot of people run unopposed because there's not enough people who think they can make it work. So for me, I come from a dual income household, well beyond the average household income in Vermont. My partner has insurance. I've always been covered by her insurance, so I didn't even have to think about that. So the biggest thing I had to think about was kind of our luxury purchases. For me, that's vinyl, right? I had to think about, can we still afford to do the things we want to do without really sacrificing how comfortable we have it? And ultimately, I'm also in a job that is incredibly easy to work with. Meaning, I went to my supervisor and said, "Hey, I'm doing this." She said, "Great. What do we need to do to make it work?" I was like, this, and this. Can you still pay me for 16 hours a week? Do I still have a job? And there's already protections in place here. You know, I don't want to lose what I've created over the 20 years or so that I've worked at UVM. I didn't have to have any really hard conversations here. And I think that's a privilege that everybody should have. I try to stay well considered about kind of the phenomenon of mediocre white guy who falls forward and just always lands on his feet. That has essentially been my life. I do not know what it's like to walk through life with identities that have historically been marginalized. I try to stay deliberate about thinking about what that might be like. I've applied that lens to my process, to the processes by which I've arrived to this very seat here today. I've blogged about it. I didn't have to raise a lot of money because I ran unopposed.
Luxury.
We can, right, that's precisely my point, is the privilege that attaches to some of the ways by which a lot of us have arrived to this place. I look like what historically a legislator has always looked like. And these systemic hurdles that are in place to joining this room are keeping us from having a more diverse voice in the room as we decide how this state should run for everybody. A short way of saying that is I don't think we need more straight white guys making those rules. And here I am anyway. There's a reason why those systems are still putting up hurdles, right? That's systemic racism, that's systemic sexism, very much alive and well, even in a place like Vermont. So I'll leave it there.
Do you have any feedback on the bill or anything you want to say as your story relates to the bill?
Well, I guess I'm in support of anything we can do to, and there's a lot in this bill that can make it easier for other people to make the decision to be here, right? So that it doesn't impact their need to find childcare, their need to find insurance, their need to make ends meet. I don't think those should be hurdles for doing what we all do. Is that? Yeah.
That's something.
Are there any questions? Hedrick, I'm sorry, Hedrick? Hedrick. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
My pleasure. I'm gonna get on the floor, so I'm gonna leave.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, your
light
light's
is
on. All right, so next we have Representative Bosselin. Oops. Hi.
Hi.
Go ahead, introduce yourself, tell us what you want us to hear.
All right, so I'm Representative Michelle Boslin. I've served one term longer than Representative Hedrick. I've been in for 2 years. So I'm just starting to feel familiar with what it means to be a legislator. What are the responsibilities in terms of the work? What is it like in terms of the compensation and trying to make that work with the other things that happen in my life? And I do have some thoughts similar to Representative Hedrick in terms of the equity of making it possible for people to serve, but looking at it from a slightly different perspective. So when I was thinking about what I was going to share today, I started out thinking about who serves with me in the House. And there's 3 basic categories that I see of my colleagues. There's people who are retired, who have Medicare, and have, in most cases, retirement income and Social Security. There are people who are wealthy. They have savings, they have income adequate that it really doesn't matter whether they have insurance offered through their state house job or whether they have an income through their state house job or whether half of the year they don't get paid for their state house job, because they have enough economic resources that really doesn't matter. And then the third category is the category where I fall, which is I would call it the working middle class. My husband is a middle school teacher at an independent school. He doesn't have a pension, but he does earn substantially more money than I do as a House rep. I believe that our annual income in terms of salary as a House rep is something like $14,000. And thankfully, my husband earns more than that, which means basically that because he is working in a full-time job that has benefits, we are able to pay our mortgage. We are able to buy gifts for our children on holidays. We are able even to go on some small vacations. But that is only because I also do some work on the side as well. But I'm 56, my husband is 62. And within 3 to 5 years, my husband will retire. And when my husband retires, I will no longer have health insurance because my health insurance comes through my husband's work. His school, he's a teacher. His school provides a very generous health policy, which covers him and me. They cover most of the premium, and they also give us an HSA to pay for medical expenses. If they did not do that, I could not serve. So when my husband retires, if things do not change, I will also be retiring from public service. The policies you make shouldn't be about me, but they should be about Vermonters who want to serve their communities. So in my life experience, I've been a teacher, I've worked in social services, I've worked in youth programs, I've done a lot of different kinds of work, and I feel like I bring a lot to the table. That said, I have friends who also would bring a lot to the table who cannot serve because they fall into that third category and they don't have a husband. They don't have a spouse who can give them benefits or who can provide enough financial cushion that they can make it work with the small semblance of hours that we can piece together when we're not doing our legislative work. As a single parent, that doesn't work. I have a friend that lives in Windham County. She would love to serve. She would be excellent. She has a very strong background as an advocate. She can't serve. She couldn't possibly afford to live on $14,000 a year and no insurance. I have a friend who is from the BIPOC community who lives in Southern Vermont. She works full time, but she doesn't earn enough money that she could make this work and still continue to serve. And that's a loss. Because if I have to retire in 3 years because I don't have health insurance, someone will take my place and I have no doubt it will be a good person. But it's very unlikely it will be a person who is of low or moderate income because it's very hard to make ends meet with the dynamics the way they are right now. So my primary concern is, well, two primary concerns. One, you shouldn't have to be wealthy or retired or married to serve in the state house. And while that's an oversimplification, the alternative to that for some of my working colleagues, which would be mostly people under the age of 65, some of my colleagues are working 30 or even 35 hours a week while serving as a legislator. And I find that astonishing personally. I work about 7 hours a week as a teacher. I teach between 5 and 8 a.m. I teach students in China online. So 3 days a week, I teach in the wee hours before the legislature starts or on the weekend. And I actually love it. I love teaching. But I cannot imagine working 30 hours and still having the energy to do this job. During the legislative session, I spend, I would say, an average of 55 hours a week, maybe 60 hours a week doing legislative work. Meetings, email, committee, hearings, meeting with constituents, constituent services, all those kind of things. Where do you find an extra 35 hours to work a job so you can get benefits? I don't know. There are some people in the legislature that do that, but for many people, that's just not possible. And so I have a huge concern that this work is not available to people with different voices. I want my friends who are single mothers to be able to serve. I want people who don't have a husband or a wife who can subsidize their salary to be able to serve. And right now that's not possible. And particularly with the benefits issue, it's just not possible. And even in my case, I don't know how long I'll be able to serve because without benefits, I will not be able to continue in this job for very long. The second issue that I think is something of an equity issue, it's definitely an equity issue, is that I find it a bit alarming that as a legislator, I'm elected for a 2-year term and I work really hard, as all of us do, for the 16 weeks or so that we're in session. And then we're in the off session. But the off session isn't really off. I don't know, maybe some people are really off in the off session, but that certainly hasn't been my experience in the 2 years that I've served. In the off session, I have constituents who have any number of issues, and when they email me, they expect me to help them. And it is my job to do that. It is my job, even if I don't get paid, it is my job to do that. And so that is only one of my jobs in the off session. I also want to meet with constituents who have concerns about all kinds of things that when we're in session, it's hard to find time to meet with them. When you're working 55 or 60 hours a week up here, it's hard to find time to meet folks when you're back home, especially because I work on my days when I'm back home. So the idea that when we have this off session time, we really actually have a lot of work responsibilities, and yet we have no compensation for that, doesn't make sense to me. You know, in addition to the literal like constituent services and answering emails and doing bill research for bills you may want to submit, meeting with colleagues around ongoing concerns in your community, going to meet with particular stakeholders. Those are all things that happen in the off session. And in addition, we have the opportunity to do training and conferences in the off session. Now, granted, that's voluntary. Nobody's making me go to a conference or making me go to a training, but it's really valuable. You know, I'm a teacher. I've worked in social services. I don't know about renewable energy, but I have to vote on policies about renewable energy. So how do I learn that? Sure, I can hear little tidbits on the floor when the debate is happening. I can learn a bit as we're going through the session in the Climate Solutions Caucus and talking to my colleagues who have that expertise. But being able to go to trainings in the off session, I can get a much deeper understanding. So like last fall, I went to the Renewable Energy Vermont Conference for 2 days. And it was really valuable. It was a great learning experience. And during those 2 days, I couldn't work in my other off-session job, which is I work at a nature-based preschool. And I couldn't be available to sub on those days because I was going to a conference. So the idea that we have these opportunities to learn and connect with constituents and do constituent services and research our bills and meet with colleagues from around the US who have done different types of legislation and found perhaps remedies to some of the things we're trying to solve, the time that I have to work on that is the off session. But it's not really off if I'm doing that work. And so I really think if we're trying to make a just opportunity for everybody to serve, people who are lower or middle income, we have to work in addition to the volunteer work that we're doing in those 6 months. And it really, really makes sense that we need some kind of compensation for that time. Because for those of us who have to work, in addition to doing our legislative work, which is volunteer for more than half of the year, we just don't have enough hours to do all the things that we need to do. And that's not justice. I don't think that Vermonters feel good about exploiting their legislators. Granted, I came to this work voluntarily, knowing that it was not going to pay a lot and knowing that it didn't have benefits and also not knowing how long I could serve. But as a legislator, I advocate for justice for the workers of Vermont. You know, I stood out and rallied with the teachers when their pensions were in jeopardy. And I went to meetings working with Vermont state workers to try and help benefits for them. And you know what? As legislators, we deserve to have that same respect. We deserve to be able to have our basic needs met, like to be paid for half of the year when we're doing work. And right now we don't receive any pay. And to receive health insurance benefits so that we can continue to do this work if we're not from a more privileged socioeconomic class or retired, so that at least we're getting Medicare and Social Security. So those are my thoughts. And I'm really grateful that you are doing this work. I had some people say to me like, oh, you don't want to go advocate for a pay raise, you just want more money. I'm like, no, that is not it. That is not it. I don't just want more money, but what I do want is more equity. And I want to make it so that other people can serve when they don't have resources and advantages that pretty much all of us probably sitting in this room have.
Thank you so much. Well said.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Hardy. So one point you made, Representative Boslin, that I don't think we expressed well enough, but I wanted to ask you is in communities that have a lower or moderate income population in general, it's more likely you would expect that then they would be represented by someone who is lower moderate income.
Mm-hmm.
What I have found is in those situations, that representative, if they are from a lower moderate income, like you and I would imagine, we have less time to serve those constituents because we are also working. So have you found in your experience that you are not literally, not competitive, but like you cannot do the amount of work that potentially another rep can by not working? And do you feel that that hurts your constituents in any way? Because I feel that for myself personally.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I don't have the time to do the work. I find the time to do the work.
Yeah.
But like this morning, I was sending emails to people at 5 a.m. and putting schedule send so that it wouldn't beep and wake them up too early in the morning. And so I do answer my constituents' emails, no matter when they write to me, within, 2 to 3 days, I will try to get back to somebody. But sometimes it means really long hours for me. And that's just because that's how I feel I kind of have to do that. But I also do know colleagues, I've heard that there are people in the House who say, we don't get paid in the off session, I'm not answering emails. And I cannot imagine that. That just doesn't feel honorable to me. So I find a way to make it work, but it's not easy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And yeah.
Thank you.
I would like to hear Emma, so I'll just.
Sure, yeah, of course. Representative Mulvaney Stanek.
She is, okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for having me. For your record, I'm Representative Emma Mulvaney Stanek. I represent Chittenden 17, which is a portion of Burlington. And I appreciate the opportunity to testify on S39 and generally the legislative compensation system. And if I have time, if there's interest, I did send a memo that my amazing intern, Hannah Goshek from UVM, helped to put in because it's actually not being introduced today, but likely tomorrow. I have a sister or a sibling bill being put in that has some similar provisions in it and a couple of other ideas that you might want to consider since you have some movement on this bill already on this side. But I really wanted to start briefly with a short story of my story of being a legislator and then make 3 core points. And I'm going to try not to repeat what Michelle and Troy added because although I want to emphasize maybe elements that have not been mentioned before. So I know how testimony goes when it gets repetitive. So those is an important issue. So just as a way of background, I currently have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. When I first was elected into the House, even though we started remotely, I had a 1-year-old running around in the building doing COVID parenting at the same time as legislating. And it was nearly impossible. It strained our relationship with my wife and myself. But now they are 3 and 7. They're even fuller of life and fuller of needs and fuller of all the things. Outside the legislature, I work as a self-employed consultant, which allows me great flexibility to do this job. And I could not do this job in the legislator job with any other role I've held before in traditional employment. It would have been impossible to get the lead time necessary to do this job well. But that being self-employed comes with a lot of cyclical nature of the job. So you have to work when the clients are ready, and it's not very predictable. You don't get to tie up a nice loose end on December 31st and say, I'm out, I have to go now do my other job. It doesn't quite work that way. And there are many more self-employed people. I serve on House Commerce than ever before in Vermont. And while it's a great space for entrepreneurs, it's a hard climate to figure out how to work and fit in with other parts of life. I've alluded to my wonderful wife, Megan, who I'm married to, is an amazing support in general, but thank goodness she has a good public sector job. She works with the City of Burlington. We have a very dorky love story that involves me being on the city council and her getting a job in the city, but thank God for that job because she offers health insurance for myself and my children. And I would not be able to do, again, the legislator job without that access. And so what also comes with that though, with her good salary, because she runs the division of water and wastewater and stormwater for the city, is also a highly demanding job, which means she has long hours. And we are not I think the household 20, 30 years ago allowed one caretaker to be home and take care of kids when they come home from school, to minimize the amount of childcare that you needed if you had a toddler, for example, to pick the kid up at 3 or 3:30. That is not the reality of my family, nor many working families in Vermont. And while we go into what we call the busy season of both budget cycling for the city of Burlington and me being here in the legislature, it gets very intense with us juggling at home. And in terms of the extra costs we have to then do in order to raise our families in Vermont and make it all work so that we can stay here and I can serve and my wife can also serve in her capacity. So in order to do that, I carry at least 2 clients during a session. So I am that legislator who works additional hours. I hate Mondays, I hate weekends because I work and I don't mean to tear up here, but it's hard to raise small children and be juggling trying to have family quality time with saying, I need to find 5 hours today to work, I need to find 2 more hours on Sunday, and I have to work all day Monday. And then I'll see you if I can, but I have evening meetings on Tuesday through Thursday on, thank God for Zoom, with clients to keep things going and to make sure that I am able to bring in my part of the income. Like on a conservative estimate, I probably work easily 1.5 FTEs most of the year, and sometimes pushing 2 FTEs because of the need for the demand of clients. And we have to take on additional childcare expenses to allow me to stay on Montpelier for the extended work, either due to legislative work or adding on that client work. And so someone else, not my wife, not myself, picks our kids up at 5:15, watches them until 7:30, and we pay additional childcare on top of full day care for my childcare for my toddler, after school for my 7-year-old, and this is just during the session. Because don't get me started about childcare crisis and summer care and all that other stuff. The 3 points I really want to emphasize or underline that my other colleagues have sort of touched on before is, firstly, the unpaid labor. The portion of work that we all do, if you've served long enough in this role, after May, well and through December, it's so much unpaid labor, and the complexities of the policymaking that we are asked to do in Vermont today, modern day Vermont, demands that we have high quality work that we're doing off session. That is the only time that we can really deeply think about policy, and we can sit with constituents and develop policy side by side with them, with advocates, whatever they might be. I find some of the best policy work I've been able to think of comes from being able to have time to sit with constituents. And the only time to do that is my May through December. Meeting with constituents in general, to be able to kind of hear their issues and hear them out and really be thoughtful instead of a quick, fast email to an email that they send during the session. That is the more meaningful time to meet with folks in your district. And the other part that I've learned as now on this side of my first term, now into my second term, is we do all this powerful and important work in the legislature. And then given the balance of government, we hand things off at May, and we hope for the best for the administration to implement the work that we do. And I've come back in every January now and learned that certain things don't get implemented as we had hoped, right? Because of a whole host of reasons. And sometimes you're able to monitor them, but again, that's all unpaid time. So I care passionately. I serve on House Commerce for unemployment, for example, and trying to track that important complex policy conundrum that we face, not only with the mainframe system, if anyone has been hearing about that issue since the pandemic, but all the other changes that are
well before.
Well, yes, but it is like this, disintegrating into dust in front of us right now. There's a number of policy issues, and we had a task force tasked by the by this body or by the legislature to really dive into it. And while I was not appointed to that committee, I cared deeply. But every time I would come to Montpelier to attend those meetings to watch that policy, so I could enter the next session better informed, knowing what was being implemented. Every meeting was unpaid. There was no mileage, and I did not get the appointment onto those committees, which is fine. But my benefit of sitting into those meetings meant I was able to be a better participant in House Commerce come January when we were talking about those issues. One thing and I don't know, Olivia, can you just show, these are not like, I don't think you need them for your public record, but I am a super dork, and because I am self-employed and track my client hours, I started tracking my legislator hours off session because I thought this was wildly problematic. So I wanted to show, if you can, Olivia, can you share that? So can you just share the 2021? I did it first because I thought my accountant would help me figure out for the taxes, and it's not allowable to deduct that because of my self-employment status. But not anymore, friends. I've tried it all. So if you could just share the 2021 legislator work image. You got that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I only started doing this in October of 2021 when I started realizing how much I was working on legislative issues. And this was prior to, really advocates. I feel like a lot of advocacy organizations reach out in the first year of the biennium. So this is the end of the first year of the first session of the biennium. So this is just what I tracked in terms of hours for October, November, December leading into the session. So that's per month, but I was really trying to keep it tight because I was working full time with my other clients. So that's 2021. If you could do the other one for 2022. 2022, for my own well-being, like emotional, mental, and otherwise, I realized I had to cut back and really only stick to policy development and constituents and districts. So you can see here that I was much better at tracking because I was committed to this. I've been deeply interested in this issue for a long time. So even going back into June, when you think it gets quite quiet, right? I was still largely meeting with folks and been doing a lot of policy development well into the end of the year. So I really ratcheted back. You can see those last 2 months of November and December to just make it realistic because none of this is paid. So I just thought those visuals would be helpful. I do this for my own affirmation that I am actually working as much as I think I'm working on legislative issues.
So for those who can't see, you just tell us a % of what the of what tall ones are.
So that's 36 hours for the month of December, 35 and a quarter hours in November. That's what that means in terms of, but this is in 2022, I was really trying to be much more disciplined about this unpaid time, basically from May to December, for doing my legislative work. So this was just that's what that's hopefully illustrating.
It's per week.
That is what I was doing per month, but I was really ratcheting it back. So I declined every single invitation for advocacy organizations from September onward. I grouped constituents. I could not make time for one-on-one meetings. I've had some new housing developments in my district with a lot of concerns around everything that we're all talking about, wraparound services, housing issues. And I said, I can't meet with each of you individually. We have to do, a group meeting, et cetera. So.
Hold on just one second. Senator Watson has a question.
So just what I'm, because the session would have been going in January, that bar is for non-legislative.
No, actually, what I started doing in January is I was going to keep tracking it outside the legislative hours, but I was being paid starting in January. So I stopped doing that from January to May. Just I only wanted to track my unpaid labor in June.
Okay. So we should not pay attention to
Oh,
that.
those would be like off the charts if we did. If you saw January through May when we were in session, I'd be scared to look at what that was, because again, these are monthly chunks. So they would have been like, 200 hours or something crazy each month. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Olivia, you can drop that down. That's fine. I just wanted to give those little visuals since I track it anyway. The second point I'd just like to talk about is right now our reimbursement systems, which I know S39 addresses a bit, as does my unnumbered bill. But right now our reimbursement system is quite inequitable depending on who you are and your life circumstances and your household structure. So we get housing, meals, and mileage now, but this does not extend to meetings for members or attending off session, as I described before, for special meetings like the UI task force I mentioned. The current housing reimbursement is that flat fee. So if a legislator is able to find housing cheaper, you get to pocket that difference. And let's be honest, that's how some members make a little bit more income in their pockets to accommodate or to supplement a little bit more than the $14,600 you're paid this session. It was $13,000 last biennium. But if you are someone like myself who has young kids and has to literally race back up 89 every day, to be with kids and tag in that babysitter and allow my wife to work late on that budget or whatever it might be, I can't access that housing stipend. I can't do that magical math to even pocket anything more because we have no current reimbursement whatsoever for childcare. And I can't, and so I'm even paying out more in terms of being able to do this work. I want to come back to childcare and dependent care in just a minute. But I just want to also mention, as I was researching this with House members, we also have some inequities related to members of both chambers who have mobility issues. You have to physically move your car because of your mobility issues from the Capitol complex area over the Capitol Plaza or wherever you are, and you have to pay for parking where you are staying. That is not reimbursed now. So I think that is an absolute inequity for folks who have mobility issues that we could easily remedy if folks document that, of course, be able to get their parking reimbursed within this reimbursement system. But just briefly back on childcare, because I think this is important to illustrate. So my toddler, my 3-year-old, if I just did the 4 days a week in his childcare center, thank you, Act 166. So this is Act 166 reduced. So we currently pay $162 a week, which is quite cheap, I would say, compared to many places for his care for those 4 days. My 7-year-old goes into after-school care, $25 a day, which is $100 a week. For those 4 days. The extra babysitters, and bless them, because I really appreciate you, Liv and Jenna, if you're watching, $135 a week, because babysitters are much more expensive, and these are college students, but they're much more expensive these days to do care, even for 2 kids to get us to $730. I say that all to say that for an 18-week session, that totals $7,146 for my 2 children to be cared for while I'm doing this job, just for those 18 weeks. I make $14,600 in this job. That is almost exactly 50% of my income. I'm bringing nothing home to help my household. If anything, I'm paying out of pocket even more with the additional extended care, if we're just even counting the after hours of school. My final point I just want to raise is around the inequitable economics and frankly, the member well-being of what we are choosing to do with how we structure these jobs. For many low to moderate income Vermonters who choose to answer the call of public service and run and win and want to represent their communities, it necessitates working a second job. And I personally feel many times during the session and off session that I am doing a disservice to both of those jobs. I am a high achiever, I'm a type A, I'm trying to recover from that. But I like to think I have a high work ethic and want to really show up for both my clients and my legislative job and my constituents. And I feel constantly like I am failing. If you look at my inbox right now, I'm super failing by my standard. To be able to do this job well, because I have to, unfortunately, in the back of my mind, figure out how else am I going to make income? How else am I going to support my kids? When am I going to see my kids in this system? We also rely heavily on other people to subsidize our incomes, whether it be a spouse, a partner, a parent, a family, a roommate, whatever it might be. And we have turned this legislature into a low wage employer, much like many of the employers we sometimes want to push against to make sure that we are state, in terms of state dollars, are not subsidizing with other benefits. My family makes enough, but we're not using CCFAP or the other subsidies related to childcare or SAP programs or other things. But I have talked to a House member who currently is on a benefits program who will be pushed off the cliff if we make even a tiny bit more. That's a problem. We should not be that kind of employer who has set up legislators to be on that benefits cliff, because we actually pay low enough where they can qualify for that, for those benefit programs. It's something very backwards. It is about time, not to quote Lizzo, it's about time, I'll say it nicely, that we really modernize this system, because we have gotten to that point where this has become a low wage employer. The last thing I just want to say, I just really want to emphasize the well-being. At least in the House, we saw a member just within the last month resign from the inability to keep it all going, to make it all do well, to make it economically work, but mentally and emotionally work. And we are not robots. We are humans. Our constituents are humans. We deserve to also be treated well in this workplace, and to think about our well-being so we can be, again, bring our best to this work on behalf of ourselves, our families, and our constituents. So I hope that we can take this opportunity to really modernize how we're compensating legislators in the state of Vermont, to be bold and brave about this conversation. I don't think we should shy away from asking for more resources. People are demanding of us to make important decisions, and I think women in particular should never shy away for asking for a raise, because it benefits everyone that we have better resource people, and this job can become more accessible to all people in Vermont. And finally, I'll just say, as a queer lesbian woman, it's hard enough in these political times to do this job, and the low pay on top of it for folks who have other minoritized identities. Why would they ever say that this job is worth it to run for it, on top of the political attacks we receive for those of us who hold those identities, if the pay itself can't even pay the bills? And I'm happy to share that memo, but I just really wanted to share largely my story. The side-by-side, which Kenna brilliantly put together, shows a couple different slight variations, at least on the approach in the House bill, including a salary-based system. It includes a dependent care provision that goes beyond childcare to make it more inclusive for legislators who either serve now or in the future, who have dependents who are over 13. And there's a mechanism in there around the Medicaid reimbursement of how to calculate that, as well as compensation for the orientation period, that time before we're sworn in, where we're expected to labor, where it's not paid. So I think those are the three major highlights that are a little bit different in the House version of the sibling bill, the version of the bill.
Great, well, thank you. Actually, our bill S39 is dependent care. It's total, it's not just. Thank you so much. We don't have time for questions because we have two other people waiting to testify. Thanks, Jen. Bye. Thanks, Rep. Mulvaney Stanek.
Thank you, Emma. That's great.
Yeah, if you could share, you shared the side by side. Okay.
Yes.
And
Okay,
would you
awesome.
email us your testimony?
Yes, I'm happy to email my testimony
That would
and
be great.
the memo. I do encourage you to take a look at it. I know you don't have time, but
And Michelle too, if you have yours.
I only have very random notes. I don't have anything formal.
That's okay. Yeah, it's totally fine. And only what you're able to share is fine. Because clearly we all have a lot to do. Our next, she's not here in person.
I know, I was like, come on.
Hi, former Representative Leffler. It's nice to see you.
Hello, hello. It is lovely to see you all, and thank you very much for the time to testify.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us. I think well, maybe you don't know everybody, or did you hear us introduce ourselves? So, we'll do it really quickly. I'm Ruth Hardy.
Olivia Parker, committee assistant.
Tanya Vihofsky.
Rebecca White.
Bob Norris.
Ann Watson.
Allison Clarkson. I want to know if we're looking out the window in Venusburg.
No,
No.
No, you are not. You are looking out the window of my home here in Suffolk, Virginia.
Oh my Lord, I hadn't realized you moved to Suffolk.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sorry we're behind schedule. So if you want to just introduce yourself and then tell us what you would like us to know in relationship to S39, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So as many of you know, I formerly served 2 terms in the Vermont House. And this is my first session not being with you in the other body. I now work as the Director of Grassroots Operations for Americans for Prosperity here in Virginia.
And what is your name for the record? Your
For the
name.
record, my name is Felicia Leffler.
Great, thank you.
Probably
ahead.
started with that, but it's always weird to be on this side of the table, so I apologize.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
So yes, I was invited to kind of give my comments here on this bill, and it's one that I'm excited to see move forward, as I had supported several in my time in the House. I think speaking specifically to legislative compensation is always deeply tricky, as it's hard to advocate for a raise for yourself without looking really self-serving. So I'm happy to sit on the other side of the table and say that legislative compensation is crucial to having a representative body. And the lack of legislative compensation to really reflect the cost of living, to reflect accurately, I think just the loss of potential earnings in another job and the time and energy and effort that it takes to serve is a big reason why we don't see more people really get involved in government from all stages, but especially in our legislative body. And it's a reason that I was no longer able to serve, which is really tragic. But when we look at legislative compensation and we look at representative representation across the body, so that we're really getting a good picture of Vermonters, that you're getting a good picture of people who want to be part of the process, we have to look at how much they're giving up in all aspects, but especially in compensation. I know that part of this bill is to include some compensation that would go throughout the year, which I think is incredibly helpful, specifically because your work does go throughout the whole year. Session is only 5 months, but the work that's done with constituent services, that's held with every coffee hour around your district, that's held with making sure that bills that are passed are followed through and the implementation is going on, all of the summer committees, all of the work on legislation that's done off of the legislative session schedule is really important work. It's what keeps the state going. It's what keeps all of the work and the preparation to make every session successful, and to compensate that, I think, is something that's long overdue. But I also think a really important part of the bill is being able to provide healthcare for members. I know that due to the cost of getting healthcare through the part-time job and the full-time job that I worked consecutively while serving as a representative was prohibitive, just the cost to opt into that, and to not have any as a legislative member was difficult. As a young person in Vermont, I went without health insurance for 6 years, I think. And it's really exciting that now in my current job, I'm able to have health insurance. It's exciting to be able to just see that go forward. But it's really tragic that I had to leave the state to do it and had to completely change careers to do it. So I think that as I look at this bill and I look at the opportunity that it provides to Vermonters who want to be part of the legislative process and want to be part of the legislative body, I'm really excited about what that means. But I just want to advocate my support and that this is not a partisan issue to me. If anything, it's advocating for a better partisan representation inside the body, because the more people are able to participate, the more voices you're going to have in that conversation. And the stronger Vermont's going to be, the stronger the policy is going to be. It's a really exciting concept. So I'm excited to follow this to fruition. And I know that you've heard testimony from a lot of current members, but as a former member, I want to say this is an issue that I think will bring people to serve, but it's also the reason people are not able to serve. And I'm excited to see your work.
Well, thank you so much, former Rep Leffler. It's really nice. Thank you for joining us from Virginia. And it's nice to see you, and also congratulations.
But we miss you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. We are a little behind schedule and we have somebody else waiting in the room to testify. So if you have your testimony in writing or could write something up quickly and send it to Olivia, that would be great. But if not, I totally understand, and just wish you all the best.
Well, hopefully I will get a chance to come and see you all, and I will be sure to unpack my winter coat for that occasion.
It's 50 degrees today.
Yeah, it feels like spring here, but.
Yeah, it's a little frightening.
All right, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Great to see you.
Okay, we have one last witness. If you want to join us up at the table, Representative Ashley Bartley. And you were one of the very first people in the building that had a conversation with this session, of course, in the ladies' room. And yes, and we talked about this bill. So it's really nice to have you join us today. And thank you for your patience. I know we're a little behind, but if you want to just introduce yourselves or yourself.
And you're new, so we don't know some of us.
Oh, sure. We'll go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm Ruth Hardy.
Olivia Parker, Tanya Mihovsky.
Rebecca White.
Bob Norris.
Ann Watson.
Allison Clarkson.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me in today to kind of introduce myself. I'm Ashley Bartley. I represent Franklin 1, which is that new Fairfax and Georgia district. Got lumped together. And I'm a young mother, a freshman legislator, and for the last 3.5 years, I was the Human Resources and Operations Director of a property management company in the state of Vermont. And a week into the session, I lost my employment due to my service here in Montpelier. A little story about me that it's usually my go-to fun fact. I decided to run for office in the delivery room in January of 2022. I was about 8 hours into birth, and I turned to my husband and I said, "How would you feel if I ran for the Vermont House of Representatives?"
Wow.
And
he's like, whatever you want.
Yeah, well, he said, "I think we should get through the next 72 hours and then we'll revisit this." And I was like, fine, you're right. It's probably not the best time. But sure enough, he was true to his word. A week later, holding my newborn baby, I asked again. I said, this is something I'm really interested in. Both of us have always been very civilly minded, work in our towns. He's a former chair of a select board, have worked with the parties before, have ran campaigns. So it was something that was really important to me. I was very excited for the possibility. I will say he had two important comments. One was that make sure I understand the commitment. I think I'm still learning what it means every day. And to leave it on the field, that if you're going to run, you got to run hard. And that's what I've been doing. And then the second was that I needed to make sure my employer would support me should I win my election, because we couldn't, and can't survive on one income. It's not possible. I am one of the unfortunate, or excuse me, I'm one of the fortunate women who've been able to take a very short 6-week maternity leave. During that time, I actually continued to work remotely. I even answered an emergency call at 2 a.m. from my hospital room with my newborn baby. So while I call it a maternity leave, I was still working, but returned to work and fully returned to work in office in March of 2022. And one of the first meetings I had was I sat down with my boss and I had said, listen, so my boss was the owner of the company. It's a smaller company. I said, listen, I'm really interested in running for office. I explained kind of the full scope of my understanding, what the commitments would be. It's Tuesday through Friday from January to maybe the beginning of June, kind of unknown, but I would be able to be in the office Monday, and the rest of those days I'm willing to work. It would be remote work. I'd work on the weekends, work at night, but something I was really committed to. And my employer could not have been more supportive. Offered to donate to my campaign, anytime he was in the office, asked how it was going, demanded that he be put on my digital and snail mail lists, and just I was overwhelmed with the support from him from the company, which really inspired me to say, okay, I can do this. I have a solid job. I've been here for a good while. I'm excited to hopefully serve in the legislature. Fast forward to November, I won my race. I'm here now, and I am type A. I crossed my T's, I dot my I's. So back in November, I started preparing for my employer and myself, what remote work would look like while in the legislature. And all of a sudden, the conversation very quickly changed. And my employer claimed ignorance to what the legislative process actually meant. He thought, or he had even gone so far to say that he thought I just would drive down here for a few hours, vote, and then drive back. I had to explain that that's not how I think any body of legislator works, and that I reiterated, nope, it's Tuesday through Friday. I would still be working, just not physically in the office. And then a week after I was sworn in, I started to receive emails from my employer that had turned hostile, demeaning. They were condescending, and sexist. And despite my working nights, weekends, completing all job responsibilities, the owner started to question my dedication to the company, my ability to do my job, and whether I had the proper authority to delegate basic administrative tasks to somebody who was below me. I was considered senior staff. Nothing had changed from my responsibilities. If not, I had more responsibilities, but he was very concerned that I was no longer going to run out and order lunch for everybody, which happy to do, but if that was the biggest concern, we had other issues. But it very quickly became apparent to me that it wasn't my job performance that came into question. It was the fact that I would not physically be in office, even though all work was being completed. The owner had suggested moving me from a salaried position to an hourly position, which he felt that I could only or should only be compensated for my time in the office. And that was considered actually doing work, not including any of my time that I put in with emails, calls, any sort of work that I was doing remotely. And at this time, I was full-time salary exempt employee. I was completely blindsided. It was the first time in a very long time that my husband and I felt financially comfortable, because while what the legislator pays, it was gravy for us then. But I very quickly realized what this was going to become. And I was upholding our agreement. I would work from the office on Monday. I would work remotely, and I was working well over 40 hours a week. But I knew that a transition to hourly, I wouldn't be paid for that overtime, and it would be almost impossible to track. As somebody who's been in the human resources profession for a long time, that type of logistical nightmare of tracking emails, even, you know, the 2-minute phone calls that I have with employees, all work just wouldn't, it was unfathomable to me to go from a salary position like this to an hourly. And as you know, the COVID shutdown taught us a lot, especially in the human resources field, that not only can employees adjust to remote work, they can flourish in it. Some employees do much better working from home. And I had, in my boss's own words, proved my ability to work remotely. And yet here I was regressing to time before COVID, which I think some of us all would love to do, but definitely not in this sense. After lengthy exchanges, it was very clear that our working relationship had been severed. I no longer could trust any sort of agreement or conversation I was having with my employer. It became very clear that he did not trust me. And so I asked for a severance proposal because I felt it was best for the company. I'd been with the company for a long time. I had very close relationships with all the employees. I just felt it was best for everybody involved. And I had not accepted the proposal to work hourly, which would in turn bring me down from 40 hours a week to 8 hours. And the idea was rejected. I was told that the company does not offer severances under any circumstances. However, once again, I was the human resources director, and I had been the one to execute many severance packages in 3.5 years. So, and the last communication I had with my employer was via email. It wasn't a phone conversation. It wasn't a sit-down meeting. And I was told that because I had rejected the offer, I, in doing so, had resigned from my employment effective immediately, and all access was shut off. I just want to state, there were a lot of ups and downs with this employer, but I loved the work that I did. It was a lot of fun, kind of like the legislator, you know, every day you had your ups and downs, but no part of me had wanted to resign from the position. And I really feel or felt in employment law, what happened was constructive discharge. Those last few weeks were made unbearable, and I really didn't have any options, anything to say, well, you see that I'm doing the work, because even though he was on every single text communication, email communication, because I wasn't in the office, it wasn't considered work. Which brings me to today and why I'm here. I would love to tell you I am special, but I am not. This is unfortunately not a unique situation. In the last 2 bienniums, we've seen upwards of 6 legislators who resigned from serving in the legislature due to employment concerns. It's unacceptable. I think that's something we can all agree on. If we're going to provide a voice for working families, young families, really any Vermonters, and those without the means to serve in Montpelier, we can't allow the body to just be reserved for those who only have the financial means, are retired, or are lucky enough to have an extenuating circumstances where they don't need that extra income. Vermont working families deserve a voice here in these walls. It's really one of the reasons I decided to run. And there's no question in my mind that government Montpelier is at its best when there are voices from diverse opinions. No business, nonprofit, family unit can survive with the notion that one person's ideas supersedes the other, and conversations breed both concessions and agreements. This is not a partisan issue. We're feeling it on both sides. And especially thinking about the working class, we kind of think, where is the working class? And the answer is simple. It's not as strong as it should be within these walls. Fighting for the Vermont working class is something that we all need to work for, and it's something I think we all are working for. And it's not just the working class, it's every Vermonter who has an idea, who can't take that time off to work and bring those ideals here. This personal experience has absolutely inspired me to introduce my own bills similar to your bills here. I really thank you for your time today and listening, and happy to answer any questions, but I know we are running late.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you, Representative Bartley. That's really helpful, and I'm really sorry to hear your story. I actually didn't know that part of your story, that you had lost your job, and there is already in current law employment protection. So if you haven't already.
Unfortunately, the statute is giving written notice within 10 days of filing.
Yes.
So I had an agreement that I would continue to work remotely. So I did not give a written notice of leave because there would be no leave as I was going to continue my work.
Because we thought you were vacant.
Well, that is definitely actually language that we're gonna get back to. I'd already talked to Jen Carby about thinking about that language, how we can tighten up some of the employment protections in the bill already. So your experience definitely underscores the need to do that. So thank you for sharing your story. And yeah, I'm sorry. And,
Wow, that's terrible.
are there any other quick questions for? Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
to you two both as well. And we'll keep working on this and send it over to your body, and you'll, I'm sure, get another kick at the can or whatever the saying is on the other